Hello. Fancy meeting you here. I've come to Venice to tell you about one of her favourite sons, the legendary Casanova. Yes, he was a great lover, but he was so much more. A reprobate, a diplomat, a musician, a spy, an inventor, an action hero. He was a gifted and complicated man, and he crammed so much into his lifetime that really we should speak of the lives of Casanova. Giacomo Casanova was born on this street in 1725. He was the son of travelling actors, and at the age of 9 they decided to send him to school in Padua. This he hated, until a kindly priest took him in and began to teach him the violin. His instrument became an important part of his charm. When he was 17, Casanova graduated from Padua University with a law degree. How precocious is that? However, while studying, he developed a love for gambling, which never left him. Unfortunately, Casanova lost a lot more than he won, so he was always up to his high heels in debt. But you know what they say? Unlucky in money. Now this might surprise you, but Casanova's first proper job was in the church. He was ordained into minor orders so that he could work as a clerical lawyer. I mean, what were they thinking? Clearly Casanova was never going to be satisfied with the sober black robes of a churchman. He spent all that he had, and probably more, on the latest fashions, hairdressers and perfume. Tall, dark and handsome, he was a sight to see. Strutting around Venice in the latest outrageous outfits, posing and preening, and flirting with all the ladies, and no doubt a fair few gentlemen too. Of course, his church career could never last, and he was dogged by scandal, although he did manage to meet the Pope. And what did he ask God's representative on earth? Well, for a special dispensation to read forbidden books and to be excused from eating fish. Next, he tried the army. He was sent to Corfu, where he was terribly bored and gambled away all his pay. So, he decided to come back to Venice and try his luck as a professional gambler. How do you think that went? Since he played the violin, he then decided to become a rock star. Or rather, play in the orchestra pit of the Teatro di San Samuele. He wasn't really very good, but he did have a lot of fun on his nights off, sending doctors and midwives out on false calls and untying private gondolas and watching them float away. And then by chance he saved the life of a leading Venetian senator. The man had a stroke whilst in a gondola with Casanova, and this was the stroke of luck he'd been waiting for. The senator was given the usual treatment. The doctor bled him and applied ointment of mercury, which nearly killed the poor man. Casanova, ignoring the doctor's protest, washed the ointment off and saved the senator and saved the day. He then spouted enough medical hogwash to convince the senator to take him on as part of his household. Now, with secure income, Casanova was living the life he'd always dreamed of, spending lavishly on clothes, parties, wine, women, and gambling. Lots of gambling. But he was also getting into trouble. A practical joke involving a corpse went wrong, and worse still, the great lover was accused of rape. He was found not guilty, but clearly Casanova needed a break from Venice, or perhaps Venice needed a break from him. Either way, he ran away to Parma, where he met Henriette, a French woman who is often considered the great love of his life, even though she left him after only 3 months. Perhaps in the hope of seeing Henriette again, he went to Paris. His progress through Europe was scandalous, one love affair after another. Somehow he managed to find the time and the energy to join the Freemasons, eventually becoming a master, but his lifestyle was attracting the unwanted attentions of the police, and he was constantly on the move. But he couldn't stay away from Venice, so he came back. By now his police rap sheet included blasphemy, seduction, and assault. Even the Inquisition got involved because of his membership of the Freemasons, and his library was searched for forbidden books. Then, in July 1755, he was arrested. The charges seem to be mostly related to his attitude towards the church and religion, but then he was never officially told what the charges were. Neither was he ever tried in front of a court. He was simply sentenced to 5 years imprisonment in the Leads, a prison on the top floor of the Doge's palace. But Casanova had no intention of accepting the hospitality of the Doge.
During an exercise period, he managed to get hold of an iron bar and a piece of marble, and he spent his evenings secretly fashioning a pick. His intention was to dig through the floor under his bed, drop down to the room below, which wasn't part of the prison, and escape. But you've probably noticed by now that things didn't always go Casanova's way. Just as he was about to carry out his daring plan, he got moved to another cell. How long would it be before the prison authorities discovered what he'd been up to? To make matters worse, his new cellmate was a prison spy. Fortunately, the spy was deeply superstitious, and Casanova managed to terrify him with dark, esoteric tales of all the terrible things that would happen to him if he ever spilled the beans. Meanwhile, Casanova managed to smuggle the pick from his old cell to his new one in his armchair. He then passed the pick to an old priest in the cell next door, who used it to break through the ceiling of his cell, got out, went across, broke into Casanova's cell, and then both men escaped up onto the roof of the palace. Casanova left behind a note which read, "I shall not die but live and declare the works of the Lord." Unfortunately, they couldn't just leap into the canal below because it was too great of a drop. So, using a ladder they just happened to find on the roof, they managed to get back in through a window below. Then Casanova, the charmer, managed to convince the guard that they'd been visitors who got accidentally locked in overnight. The poor Duke let them out, and by sunrise, they had escaped by gondola. Wonder what happened to the guard. He fled to Paris in January 1757, and it was here that he had his greatest financial success as a leading light in the foundation of the state lottery. I bet you didn't know that when you pick your numbers every week, you owe it all to Casanova. The French were so enamored of him that they even offered him French citizenship, but as a true Venetian, he declined. Instead, he tried his hand at a different kind of gambling, the world of business. He invested heavily in a silk-making factory, and although he took a very personal interest, having sex with almost every one of his female employees, the business nevertheless failed, and it ruined him. Poor Casanova once again found himself in prison for debt, and pursued by his creditors, not to mention more than one outraged husband. It was time to flee. Spurred on by massive debt, Casanova proceeded to copulate his way across southern Europe. Incredibly, Pope Clement XIII presented him with an award for propagating the Catholic faith. Well, he was propagating something, I suppose. He spent the next 3 years trying to establish more lotteries. Well, he certainly did have stamina, didn't he? I mean, imagine bumping along 4,000 miles of bad roads in flimsy carriages and then humping the nights away in exotic locales like Moscow and St. Petersburg. He wasn't successful in money-making, but his amorous adventures were legendary. The years rolled by, and Casanova found that Europe was starting to turn its back on him. After a disastrous trip to Spain, where there was even an assassination attempt on his life, along with a 6-week stint in jail, it was definitely time to go home. And after an 18-year exile, Casanova returned to Venice. But arriving back is not the same as being back, and Casanova struggled to reintegrate into Venetian society. Times had moved on, and so had most of his patrons and contacts. Sure, he was invited to the odd dinner party, but the old days were dead. He was 49 years old, and his gadabout lifestyle was catching up on him. He was thin, not as attractive as he had once been, and his charm was failing him as he succumbed to fits of rage. He found solace in the arms of women. He found plenty of love, but fortune proved a fickle mistress. Frustrated, he published a damning satire on the Venetian nobility, which got him thrown out of Venice for good in 1783.
His restless travels continued. To Paris, where he met Benjamin Franklin. To Bohemia, where he worked as a librarian. Well, it was a steady salary and some much-needed security, but oh my, he was bored. 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 He found some enjoyment in writing about the good old days, and his memoirs are amongst the most important contemporary insights into 18th century life amongst the elite.
He died in June 1797 at the age of 73. His last words were, "I have lived as a philosopher and I die as a Christian." He was buried at Dux in what is now the Czech Republic, but his grave is lost. A tragic and romantic end to the many lives of Casanova.